Good evening. This is TomPadula from TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers. And today is Australia Day. Happy Australia Day to everyone. And I thought that for some reason this year I haven't organised very much, neither for Christmas nor for Australia Day. But they've both been in my mind, and what I'd like to do today is to start my series of lectures on on history. But rather than looking at history, I just want to give my opinion about certain topics that are important to us all. This one here is called, I'm going to call these the occasional lectures of TomPadula. So now and then this will be number one, and it's too right that it is dedicated to Australia. And the topic is Australia Day, past, present and the future. I hope you enjoyed it. What I have to say, it's an opinion. That's all it is. So not taking sides, I'm looking at the history of this country, and I'm not concerned about the future, but I like the direction that unites the country. So here we go. On this Australia Day celebration and invasion rallies, I find it compelling for me to write about what I have promoted for more than 20 years. In other words, Australia Day Celebration Week. I find that changing the date of this invasion by the British Empire is not a good idea at all. That flag ceremony by Captain Arthur Phillip propelled Australia into the modern world, one that disturbed very many Indigenous lifestyles across all continents, one that displayed untold cruelty on Indigenous people worldwide. For many things, came to change the lives of those people wherever the invaders arrived. In the case of Australia, Captain Arthur Phillip and his tall ships arrived in Sydney with a motley crew of guards and prisoners. What harm did they bring with them? Some were initially the rejects of London society by the overcrowding of prisoners on the River Thames because of the lost war in America. American War of Independence, the King of England lost his colony. It was then a world where changes were inevitable. People moved around the world, discovering all sorts of different places from where they were, where they were before. In other words, they were in the continent of Europe, but then after 1492, the world became a lot more closer than ever before. Let's go on. In all of this travelling activity by the European colonisers, Australia was seen as a faraway post. The inhabitants of this vast land were divided like in Neolithic times, with each group claiming and protecting its own area of land, one that was used according to the need of the group. Australia at the time had around 150 groups of Indigenous people. Maybe more, I'm not quite sure, people can provide the exact number of groups that exist in Australia. And there are maps that show this as well. No central government, there was no central government amongst all these groups. No formal schools, except, the teaching within the group. No army or bureaucracy. All the power rested with the elders of each group. So the elders held the power. The Indigenous people were scattered on their own land. They were not match against the invaders. Indigenous people fought back when they could, and they did as well. But in the long run, those ships and new settlers kept coming. Couldn't stop them. And they are still coming today. So how do we reconcile the past 236 years with the last 60,000 years of indigenous settlements in this vast continent? Reconciliation can only come when recognition of past rights and wrongs are considered. I want the Australian Day Celebration Day to become an Australian Celebration Week, in which all groups of people in Australia can hold with their own family, communities from overseas settlers, and anyone who is an Australian citizen, they can have a celebration of their arrival into this modern Australian, in this modern Australia, which is a beacon of multicultural society in which we can celebrate our peaceful coexistence. That's true of Australia, apart from all the, the differences we have, but it's relatively safe because there are so many groups. Who do you favour? We're all Australians if you become a citizen. That's it. It's important not to change the date of the initial arrival of new settlers to mark an historical post from which we can reflect about our inability to change such a past. The invaded people of 236 years ago faced a difficult future in which they could not win against this mass of invaders, for after all, Earth is our planet. All the lands and the seas have been divided into nations and independent small states for administrative reasons. They weren't there when, the dinosaurs were there. The Earth was one for everybody. I want to think that we are all humans in need of solutions for a happier way to live in peace and harmony. My celebration week would start a few days before the invasion day, in which all Aboriginal groups celebrated their own local language and culture. This would be followed by the current Australian Day date, then multicultural groups can celebrate their own language and culture. Or, which is the model that I prefer, before the 26th of January, Indigenous and multicultural Australia would hold their own celebrations of their local or national language and culture in Australia to provide us with links with the Indigenous past and the world nations in a show of peaceful coexistence and harmony. So if we're all together, of Italian background, come on Italy, we're in Australia, what have we done? Greek background, Hindi, China, and the indigenous people, the various groups, because they are still divided. They're not, each one still want to cling to their own land, which belongs to God. Really, because we are here on Earth on a limited tenure. So the 26th Australia Day would see those tall ships arrive once again to remind us of the very challenging voyage of those prisoners and guards to this land. They didn't have it. A lot of people who came on those ships died. And when they arrived, they didn't have any food. They didn't have, their lifestyle was totally changed. They couldn't survive like the Indigenous people here, who had been here for thousands of years. But what happens with invaders everywhere? They settle, and then it takes decades and a century or two, etc., to become part of the land. So modern Australia owes much to the colonisers, who came to exploit this land as they were used to doing with their own neighbours in Europe via the many cruel wars that they fought with each other over so many centuries. So these people who came from overseas, they fought forever, for centuries, about pieces of land that one wanted to control and govern over. And they did it in a violent way. So when, Indigenous people complain, well, look at the history of these other nations, of these other continents. The similarity between Australia and the Americas is obvious, etc., etc. And look at Africa too, what happened there. And what happened in Asia. We won't talk about the North Pole and the Antarctica, they came a lot later, but they're still important. Now, Australian citizens have links with the rest of the world. We also have developed this nation, to such an extent that the original inhabitants would not recognise their own areas of tribal land. If they came here and they say, oh, we want our land back, the Wurundjeri, etc., we want all this land, we want Melbourne back. What? All the concrete that has been poured down? Land. It's about use. So let's stop about this nostalgia for the living conditions of the past 60,000 years. And let's all give each other a fair go in our future in this country. So that's my thought for Australia Day 2024. Now I want to finish with a little, it's like not a poem, but a saying. Australians unite under the Southern Cross in peace and harmony, not forgetting the past and enjoying the present with respect and opportunities for everyone. Imagine this. So look at the cosmos for inspiration. Our dream time is here. So Indigenous people and all the people who live in this country, their dream time is here. We love this. We love Australia. We love modern Australia. I don't know whether we would love the sacrifices that the colonisers made over centuries and fighting the local Indigenous people, like they did also in the Americas. Terrible things happened there. So I don't say to forget the past. I actually teach world history now at the University of the Third Age. I'm interested in it, and I'm interested in all the continents, and I look at the timelines of the Earth from the beginning of the beginning of the Earth till now, and the other timeline that I look at, that's vertical one. The other one is horizontal. In other words, look at every continent and what happened there with each nation, each group of people, all the good things and the bad things that happened to them. So that's it. However, I finished with this particular presentation, but in 1988, we celebrated the Bicentenary celebrations. Now, I wrote this piece here in 1988, and I thought one day I will put it down on paper. It's in my, my book here, written here. Because I used to keep, my thoughts and reflections on paper. I've always done it since the late 60s. So this was January the 1st of 1988. And the tall ships did come. It was organised so that, and I went with my children to see them. Okay, so I came home and here we go. We began Australia's bicentenary celebration amidst some controversy, and so it should be. After all, Australia was already inhabited when the Europeans discovered it for themselves. That was the reality. The key to this year is to reassess the nation's position and to look forward with this new concept of respect for one another. This land was home to a number of tribes with well-defined areas of use. The fact that there was no land registry and the fact that the Aborigines, like the American Indians, were not able to push back the white invader gives everybody something to think about. Who does Australia, as indeed did the whole planet, belong to? It is only possible to own it in the sense that we use it. If a family owns a piece of land, then it belongs to them as long as they use it. This family can be given possession of this land as long as the land is used, plus some cooling off period after neglect has entered into it. But ultimately, possession is 9/10 of the law. So you've got to be on it to protect it. Remember, this was written in 1988. If you have the care of a property, then you also have the responsibility to look after it. The Aborigines looked after Australia in the sense they did not change it so dramatically that the natural habitat was changed. The problems with buildings and projects that change the landscape, the flora and the fauna are obvious. On the other hand, you cannot keep some land virginal if there is the demand of use. So if there are people, then there is activity and there is change. Europe has survived the European civilizations. Australia has survived the Aboriginal and the 200 years of white and other coloured settlements. People come in over the last 200, well, at that time was 200 years. The real questions that need to be answered are those about what we are going to do with what we have. If we want to change it in any particular way, then we should have some say on how this should be done. If we adopt a laissez-faire approach, Australia, populate, and then any person on this living planet should have an opportunity of settling here. There is the land, but if Australia does populate, then there will also be the problems that people bring with them, or the ones they create when they are here. It's obvious you come from somewhere else. If I go back to Italy or I go to another country, I have to adjust. And you don't know the local area, so it takes time to learn. The main question is, who should come to Australia? The moment we ask this question, then the Pandora box of race is opened. Each group will want to have some sovereignty of entry, if necessary, at the expense of someone else. We really do need to reassess our views about people, whatever their colour. The problems arise when the colours begin to mix. Is it really a problem? For some it is, and for others not so. I don't see a problem with it, but some people do. It's a hard question to answer, and one which is based on personal preference or views or whatever. So who should live in Australia in the future? If we invite people of all races to come here, as we have done, what is our personal view? And if we do have a view, can it be one which is not quite acceptable? And then I wrote the next piece on the 25th of January, 1988. I watched the Australia Day concert organised by New South Wales. I suppose the real questions of history are the ones which suit us best at the time. At this time, we ponder over the last 40,000 years, but 60,000 years, with some sort of controversy. But the real question are those which will come up after the 200-year celebrations are over. Mabo came after. When we settle down once again and ponder our innermost views, what are our decisions going to be? Shall we really have all that much of a say in it, or will they develop as we develop our emotions with lots of stabs in the dark? That's what we do, politically. And so we give some of the land back to the Aborigines with our white set titles. But is that really a satisfactory solution? Is that going to make of the Aborigines an integral part of this nation? I'd venture to say that we should give back some of the spirit, some of the pride, some of the comfort, some of the freedom which the Aborigines enjoyed in this land for so long. But should they have it all? What about us? What about all the new claimants? What is this land that we call Australia a part of? Does it not belong to the fraternity of, or sorority of the continents and the waters which makes our planet? And if the spirit of this land is that of freedom, then shouldn't Australia be the land for all? If all these people are here, can Australia's freedom still exist? This freedom which some would call the freedom to get lost in the bush, or on the mountains, at sea, or in some island, then we must understand that we are talking about keeping this continent relatively free of people in order to preserve and enjoy its natural habitat. Well, we still only have 25 million people here. And if we go to Europe, which is almost the same size as this, or there are 800 million people living there. And if we go to Asia, even greater numbers. So the delicate balance of fauna and flora, of agriculture and the wild, of buildings and trees are some of the things which we are focusing this year. We're focusing on this year. Australia, the Aborigines, this nation of today, cannot have its cake and eat it too. What it is allowed to have is the painful decision which comes out of choice. If we do give some of the land to the Aborigines, will the Aborigines make a statement regarding their acceptance of the new settlers? Can the older settler accept the newer ones? These are the emotional factors which throw a shadow on our joy of celebrating this nation. Now, and then I finished this one here. To rejoice in the coming of others who have destroyed our culture is to love your neighbour. I'll repeat that. To rejoice in the coming of others who have destroyed your culture is to love your neighbour, and vice versa. So to love one's neighbour, to love other people from other lands is what we need to have for peace and harmony in Australia. And that's it. I've read my 2 pieces and I've done my bit for Australia Day 2024. This lecture of mine is, I don't know what we call it. I'm going to call it, what am I going to call them? I said that we're going to call it the lectures of TomPadula. Yeah, the occasional lectures of TomPadula. So I'll be speaking about different topics from now on. And these topics here will relate to my teaching of world history at the University of the Third Age. And also now I have my own school in my old building in Trippowich Street. And what did I call it? I called it something to do Centre of Languages and Culture, ICLL, the Centre of Languages and Culture. Yes, I think something like that. Anyway, if you're interested in what I do, contact me and we'll talk. On this note, Happy Australia Day 2024, and may all the rallies and the celebration events come together in unity in their diversity. There you are, unity in our diversity. And apparently, I'm doing Dante Alighieri Paradiso at the moment. Even, heaven has got its own variety of spaces, of luminous spaces and dark spaces. Okay, this was and this is Tom Padula from TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers. Good night. Ciao, ciao. I better finish it off, no? And this will go on, of course, will go on Facebook, and then it'll make its way on YouTube and insegna.com. Ciao, ciao.